What do season expectations look like for Jared Spurgeon, Alex Goligoski, Jonas Brodien, Matt Dumba, John Merrill, and Dimitri Kulikov? We find out on today's episode of Locked on Wild.
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into today's episode of Locked on Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. In today's bonus episode of Locked on Wild, we look at season expectations for the Wild's starting defensemen of Alex Goligoski, Jared Spurgeon, Jonas Brodien, Matt Dumba, and Dimitri Kulikov and John Merrill. What can we expect to see from those line pairings? Can they exceed some statistical projections for this season? And are there any concerns for those six heading into the season? My name is Seth Topal, host of Locked on Wild, veteran of over 10 years of Minnesota sports coverage, including the last couple of seasons covering exclusively your Minnesota Wild. Thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen every day. Technically, this would be your second episode today, as we are doing two-a-days all week. I got to get myself into shape for the season to start as well. So we will have bonus episodes all week as we continue our player expectations, as well as a ton of season preview content coming for you as well. So let's take a look at what we can expect from the six players that will likely be most involved with the Minnesota Wild's defense here this season. We will start off today by taking a look at the top pairing, Alex Goligoski and Jared Spurgeon. And as we have been doing with these player expectations, season previews, we are trying to answer three questions. First question, what constitutes a successful season for each player? Can those players beat their season projections from a statistical standpoint? And are there any concerns heading into the season with each player that we have gone through? And as mentioned, we'll be going through pretty much the entirety of the defense here today. We'll talk about the goalies, as well as a couple of players that could make some noise for the Wild heading into the season as well, potential call-ups. So that's our plan here for this bonus episode. And we'll start it with the line on defense that will probably be the top line, and therefore expected to kind of set the tone for this Wild team. That, of course, is Jared Spurgeon and Alex Goligoski. Now, we'll start with Jared Spurgeon. And what does a successful season for Spurgeon look like? Well, the nice thing about being a fan of the Minnesota Wild is we've had a chance to see Spurgeon over the last several seasons just continue to elevate his play on an almost nightly basis. And it's not a stretch to say that Spurgeon is maybe one of the most underrated defensemen in the entirety of the NHL, because he just continues to, it seems like, slip under the radar and really just does some great things that a lot of us fans get to see, but not the rest of the general NHL. So for Jared Spurgeon, a successful season for him, I think, just looks similar to a lot of what we've seen from Jared over the course of his career. Now, I don't want that to sound like a cop-out answer, but at the same time, the Wild are going to need Spurgeon to help fill a little bit of the departure of Ryan Suter. So we will see a lot of Spurgeon this year, and it just comes down to him continuing to do the things that we see on a nightly basis. The poke checks, the fighting for the puck, and just making life miserable for opposing players. If he continues to do that and continues to really be, the captain of this team, as it says on his jersey, if he continues to do that, this Wild team defensively is going to be able to really establish a nice tone, as they have over the last handful of years. And for Spurgeon, he really does not have to do a lot from an offensive perspective because the Wild have so many great options scoring. He's able to really focus on kind of staying back and helping this team out, especially defensively. Penalty kill, if Spurgeon can help turn that penalty kill unit into the top 10 to 15 in the league, doesn't have to be in the top 5 or anything. As long as this is in, say, the 10 to 15 range on the penalty kill, then it's going to be a very successful season for Spurgeon. And basically just leading by example and continuing to be the captain of this team. If he does all of that and he continues to just be a force defensively, this team is going to be very good once again in defensive metrics. Now, projections for Spurgeon this year includes potential for 9 goals and 34 points in 71 games. Very slow start for Spurgeon in this past season. It took him a long time to do anything offensively. He finished with 25 points in 54 games, 7 goals, 18 assists. So he was able to put it together in the back half of the year. And so if he plays at that pace, then I think there's no question that Spurgeon could beat his metrics and could outpace his projections on the offensive side of the puck. But at the same time, a guy who gets a lot of blocks and is out there really to help stop opposing defenses, not asked to do as much defensively. So I think right around that 25, 30 points is what you can expect from him on that back end. And like I said, the Wild really don't need him to do a lot other than that. If Spurgeon does not meet some of those lofty standards that have been set, or if he starts to show signs of decline, that is really the only spot that I have concern for Spurgeon. He's getting close to the 30-year mark, and so if he just continues to churn and just do things to help this team win, then he's going to be just fine. And I guess decline in play is really the only concern that I have for Spurgeon heading into this year, but I haven't seen anything with the exception of the offensive anomaly last year. I haven't really seen anything to suggest that he is due for a decline. So top defenseman, really not any sort of red flags for Spurgeon heading into the season. All right, let's move on to his defensive partner, that being Alex Goligoski, the biggest free agent signing for the Wild here this offseason, and a guy who it all boils down to is the replacement for Ryan Suter. So obviously the expectations, and I put this in a similar way for, I believe it was Freddie Gaudreau. All we need Goligoski to really do is just make it so that we don't have points during the season where we say, boy, we really miss Ryan Suter. Like, we really need Suter on the power play or any number of spots. If Goligoski can minimize the impact that is felt by the loss of Ryan Suter, that's going to be a tremendously successful season for him. And, I think he brings a little more upside offensively than what we have seen. And yes, he did have a low point total this past season in Arizona, but let's be honest, Arizona wasn't great. And so for him to come to a team that has a chance to make it to the playoffs and to, make some noise in the playoffs, you feel like that should energize him heading into the season. So for Goligoski, a successful season for him is one where we don't really ever have to utter the phrase, boy, do we miss Ryan Suter. Projection-wise, Goligoski expected for 4 goals, 27 assists, 31 points in 77 games played. If he gets to 77 games played, that is going to help not feel the impact of Ryan Suter having not been here, because Suter, for many things that he was durable. And so if Goligoski can hit that mark himself, that further leads to that Goligoski was a great signing and will help minimize that loss of Ryan Suter on the defensive side of the puck. Concerns for Goligoski is if he looks, out of place, if he makes us repeat that phrase that we really miss Suter, and if he looks like a guy who is kind of on the decline, that's where the potential problems could show up for him. So again, just come in and fill that Suter role, play opposite of Jared Spurgeon, and just help this team out defensively. And really, you couldn't ask for more from a guy who is a Minnesota native and is coming from a team in the Coyotes who have been near the bottom of the standings to come to a team that's expected to be near the top of the Central Division standings. Could definitely give him a boost, and that makes it a perfect pairing between him and the Wild as well. So that's a look at the top pairing for the Wild and what to expect from them here this season. We will take a look at what to expect from Jonas Brodien and Matt Dumba. That is next here on Locked on Wild. Does this sound familiar? You've got one device that lets you catch the game live, another that lets you stream your favorite shows, you're watching sports highlights on your phone, and you've got your neighbor's best friend's login for the good stuff. Well, I want to tell you about a simple way to get all of that entertainment you love without the hassle, and a great way to finally get your TV together. It's called DirecTV Stream, and it brings your live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before, so you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. That means no more juggling remotes and no need to buy another device ever again. And the best part, there is no annual contract. So get rid of the clutter and the confusion and get your TV together with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more at directtv.com. That's directtv.com. Compatible device required. Content varies by package. Continuing with today's episode of Locked on Wild. And again, thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen every day. Although, as I mentioned at the outset of the show, this is technically your second listen today because it is episode number 2 for today. So second listen here, but still, Locked on Wild, thank you for making it your first listen every day. Once you're done, make sure to check out the Crosschecks live NHL season preview show with Andrew Berkshire and Mary Clark. It will be on the Locked On NHL YouTube channel from 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday, October 12th. Andrew and Mary tee up the new NHL season with a look at the key storylines around the league, featuring drop-ins from our roster of local NHL hosts, fantasy insights from Locked On Fantasy Hockey's Scott Cullen, and award and Stanley Cup playoff predictions. That's all coming up on the special season preview show of the Crosscheck on the Locked On NHL YouTube page. Let's take a look now at season projections for Jonas Brodien and Matt Dumba. Now, this is an intriguing one because you've got a couple of guys here in Brodien and Dumba who are very much veterans on this Wild roster, and two guys kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum offensively. We saw Brodin really add goal scoring to his repertoire in 2021, and we saw Matt Dumba's offense struggle a little bit throughout the course of the season, as Dumba finished with just 6 goals in 51 games. Now, by all accounts, Dumba has looked great through the preseason, so hopefully that is a sign that he will get that offense back. And that really is where it boils down for Dumba, is a successful season for Matt Dumba is one where we see him get some of that offensive confidence back and start to see him really put that piece of his game back together along with his defense. With Ryan Suter departing this team, there's obviously a huge amount of minutes up for grabs, also with the loss of Ian Cole. headed to the Carolina Hurricanes. A lot of minutes that are up for grabs for some of the top guys for the Wild. And so I think Dumba, a guy who could benefit from an extra shift or two during the course of the game. And if he can play as he has throughout his career, that's really going to help shore up that middle line of defense for this Wild team. So for Dumba, a successful season this year sees him pull the offense back into his game, because if he is able to do that, he could see a lot of time on the Wild power play, because Suter's not there anymore. And there's going to be some time up for grabs with that top power play unit that should be a dynamic one for the Wild this year. And even if it's not the top unit, that second unit will be critical as well. So if Dumba can get the offense back on track, that's going to be a hugely successful part of his season this year. Fantasy projections wise, Dumba expected for 10 goals and 24 assists in 77 games, so 34 points, which would be a nice uptick from his projection last year. I think it's definitely one that Dumba could exceed, as he has been a guy in the past that has been able to contribute double-digit goals, as well as high point totals for a defenseman. So if he puts it together and the offense takes a step up, then I see no reason why he can't beat those projections for this year. The only concern really for Dumba has to do with the offense again, is that if his offense continues to further decline, then you are putting yourself in a position where maybe you have to look at offloading Dumba to try to free up some salary cap space after this season. But if Dumba is able to play up to his potential and up to his level that he's been at in the past, then those concerns are washed away, and this team ends up doing just fine. But I would say that's probably the biggest area of concern for me, is not on the defensive end, but just on the offense continuing to regress and to slide. So if Dumba can put that back together and can have a nice, strong season on both sides of the ice, it's going to be smooth sailing for him for the next couple of years as well. Jonas Brodien's 2021-2022 season projection sees it kind of come at a different spectrum. Obviously, Brodin as well, one of the most unsung defensemen in the league. Funny that the Wild have two of those guys, isn't it? That they got Spurgeon and Brodin as well. Just an elite defenseman for this team, and one that just never gets enough credit for the things that he does on the ice. And for Brodin, we saw, interestingly, kind of an unlocking of his offensive skill set this year as well, with 9 goals. So for Brodin, if he can kind of keep things at that level, in addition to providing the stellar defense that he is always known for, that's going to be what I would consider a successful season for Brodin this year, is not having to do too much, just continuing to do what he has done, which I'm not trying to discredit. What he's done is not a lot, because he does a ton. So if he just continues to play at that level this season for the Wild and adds some of that offense that he provided this past season, then we're due for another great Jonas Brodien season here this year. Projections-wise for Brodin, there is an expectation that he'll have 4 goals, 19 assists, so 23 points, which is the exact same number that he had last year, just 9 goals and 14 assists. So if the offense wasn't just a one-year fluke, I don't see any reason why Brodin can't beat those numbers and get into the 30-point threshold and really help this team out on the back ends. I see no reason why he can't exceed those numbers and put up even better numbers than that here this season. Really, the only area of concern that I have for Brodin is if he starts to show some signs of decline, which, again, we really have not seen anything that would suggest that he would. But if we start to see any sort of a loss in burst or any number of other things, if we start to see some decline from Brodin, that obviously is a huge red flag. but I don't believe that there will be anything like that this year. So it's more so just let's see more of the same of what we've seen from Jonas Brodien over the last handful of years. And again, the second line of defense is going to be real solid for this Wild team. And another reason why they'll have one of the better defenses, again, in the NHL, as has been the case, again, for the last several seasons as well. So that's kind of what I expect from Dumba and Brodin. Really don't need either of them to rock the boat by any means or to really go above and beyond their performance level. It's just more so let's just see some of the same that we've seen from them over the last couple of years. Consistency and a nice, just even keel showing from those two would be great. We will talk next about the biggest question mark for this Wild's third line of defense, Dimitri Kulikov and Jon Merrill. That is next here on Locked on Wild. This far, Built Bar wants to help you celebrate freedom of choice. Did you know Built Bar has a full lineup of amazing flavors? They include coconut, cherry barcia, raspberry, mint brownie, double chocolate, salted caramel, strawberry orange, cookies and cream, and German chocolate. For my money, raspberry is the best flavor, but if you're not sure where to start, just grab a mystery box and you'll get 2 each of those flavors. Not only are Built Bars amazing tasting, but they are very healthy as well. Each bar contains 17 to 18 grams of protein, ranges in calories from 130 to 180, contains only 4 to 5 grams of sugar, and only 4 to 5 grams of net carbs. So amazing tasting and amazingly healthy for you. What's not to like about a Built Bar? So head to Built.com and use the promo code LOCKED15 and you'll get 15% off of your order. Again, use the promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. Final segment of today's episode of Locked on Wild. And again, thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen every day. Thank you for making this bonus episode your second listen of Locked on Wild here today. Continuing with our projections for the Wild's starting defense. And we got a couple of guys who could not necessarily make or break the season for this Wild team, but we got a big unknown on the back end of this Wild defense, which will see us put Dimitri Kulikov as well as Jon Merrill into the lineup, most likely to fill those final 2 spots on defense. And if you look at their projection, both of them, not a whole lot of points for either Kulikov or Merrill. 4 assists for Kulikov, 5 assists for Merrill. And so really, I'm going to combine these two for the purposes of this final segment. All I want to see from these two guys is something similar to what we saw from the third line for the Wild last year, which was Carson, Soucy, and Ian Cole. Neither of those guys really did anything to really, jump off the page, but they were both incredibly consistent and very, very good at not being noticed, which you talk about the flashy plays and, some of the stuff that we love to see as fans. But there's something to be said about a couple of guys who you just never mention because they're just always doing their job and they're not giving up, a bad turnover that leads to a 2-on-1 going the other way or taking bad penalties, things along that line. So for Merrill and Kulikov, and if Jordy Batten ends up being kind of a part of this third line as well, I can lump him into this too. For those 3 guys, if they don't do a whole lot in the way of standing out, but just continue to do their job on a consistent level night in and night out, the less we call their name, I think the better. And I think there's huge amounts of incentive for them to do that, because the more we have to call their name and we see mistakes, lead to odd man rushes or to goals, there's a guy sitting down in Iowa that is ready to step up and take one of their spots if needed, that being Kalen Addison. He'd be ready to start tomorrow if the Wild asked him to. And so for Kulikov, for Jordy Ben, for John Merrill, whatever combination of those guys ends up being the third line for this Wild team, play your game, don't be noticed, and they will be able to give pretty much exactly what the third line gave for the Wild last season. Now, Ian Cole left a lot of blocked shots to be filled. And so Kulikov, Merrill, one of those guys, if somebody can step in and fill the blocks, the block shot department, that's going to be a huge help for this Wild team. But again, you don't need anything super flashy. We don't need top level production from those guys. Just fly under the radar, play your game, and don't be noticed. Just like any good offensive line in football, just do your job and protect the net, and everything will be just fine. In terms of a points projection, I mean, Cole had 8 points last year? Soucy had a goal and 16, 17 assists, so not a whole lot in the way of points. And so I think there's a really good chance that we don't see a lot of points from this third line defense here this season because, again, we really don't need them to do any of that. Just focus on defense, do your job there, and we'll be just fine. That being said, concerns heading into the season for this third line. Yeah, if we end up seeing bad play from this third line defense, and Jordy Ben has not been particularly good from what I've seen of the preseason. Now there's a chance that, there are a lot of elements in the preseason that lead to kind of misleading performances. You're playing a team where they don't play any of their top 6 guys, or you are trying defense combos or forward combinations that don't end up working. And so, people look at the box score and they see that you didn't score any goals. Well, we were plugging and playing pretty much every line that we threw out there. So some of it maybe could just be not being put in a good spot or the right spot. But at the same time, there is a huge potential that this third line ends up underachieving, underperforming, and leading to some head-scratching moments and even some goals allowed by this Wild team. And so I do have concerns about this third line heading into the season. And if they don't play up to their level of play, if they don't play up to what we saw from the third line last year, that's going to be a problem. And that problem will be addressed by bringing Kalen Addison up to at least take care of half of that equation. Beyond that, I mean, we could see mixing and matching of lines, trying to even things up and spread things out over 3 full lines of defense, or we just see more from the top 2. There is legit concern, though, at least in my mind, about what to expect from this third line defense. So if they blend in, do their job, and they don't get called on a lot, then I think we're going to be fine. If we hear their names on a consistent basis in a not great way, then we got some issues. So hopefully they're able to just kind of blend in and just give us very, very even-keeled minutes for third line defense. And I guess we'll just have to wait and see kind of what that looks like heading into this season. So that is today's episode. Again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen every day. Again, make sure to check out the Crosschecks live NHL season preview show coming tomorrow from 5 to 6 p.m. Central Time. And a lot of great content coming to help preview the season. That'll be over on the Locked On NHL YouTube channel. Andrew Berkshire and Mary Clark tee up the new NHL season with a look at the key storylines around the league, featuring drop-ins from our roster of local NHL hosts, fantasy insight from Locked On Fantasy Hockey's Scott Cullen, and award and Stanley Cup playoff predictions. So make sure to check that out. as well as Locked On NHL leading up to the start of the season this week. And make sure to check out all of our content for Locked On Wild on all of our social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. Got some great stuff coming up here this week as the season gets started. And you can find new episodes of Locked On Wild every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.